Hey there, Rednecks, Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great, good. I was recently perusing one of the gun boards that I'm a member of, and I came across a post from someone declaring, as one does with these sorts of things, that they are going back to using brass brushes to clean their bores. Critics be damned. And of course, since this was a forum, there was a bit of a disputation that sprang up between those who used brass brushes and a minority who had sworn off them, each side like an iron peg, hammered into the frozen ground, unmoving from their position. And as I read the thread, I had but one thought. Is this something we're actually arguing about? Now, in case you spend your days more productively, the debate is essentially this. Are brass brushes best avoided as they could potentially damage your bore over the long and maybe even short term? Now, I know there's the Redneck Preppy again, tackling the most current topics of the day as usual. But whatever you want to say about this, there are still people who steadfastly argue that brass brushes are a tool of the beast and must be avoided. Now, those who believe this sort of thing tend to bring up the following arguments. 1. Brass brushes, through the action of being pushed through a bore, can cause damage. 2. Just like the mightiest canyon can be carved out by the smallest stream over uncounted years, so too can a bore be gradually eroded by a brass brush. And finally, number 3, a brass brush or a cleaning rod can capture grit that's in your bore, and the action of pushing them through can grind that grit against the sides of your bore, either causing immediate damage or gradual erosion. Are any or all of these plausible, though? Today I'm going to take a look at the question and render my humble opinion, emphasis on opinion, on the matter. So the standard objection to brass brushes being a danger to your bore is that brass is simply much softer than steel. Now, if you're an engineer, you're probably pretty familiar with things like the Brunel and Rockwell hardness charts. I'm going to stay in my lane because I'm not a metallurgist. I'm just going to say that these, among others, are commonly referenced as measures of a substance's hardness. Short version. Brass is softer than steel according to every hardness chart in existence. The Brunel hardness of brass is 40 to 60, while the Brunel hardness of 416 stainless steel, which is often used for gun barrels, is 262. Somewhat of a difference. And because of that, it's argued, brass is unable to mar the surface of steel. And anyone who would even argue this is right. Unless you're doing stuff with a cleaning rod, a brass brush, and a bore that are illegal in several southern US states, I'm fairly certain that your gun's barrel will last several lifetimes if all you do is clean it all day, every day. A gun barrel that is made of steel so soft that it could be marred by brass is what I think we should call defective. So the first two arguments, that brass brushes are a tool of Satan waiting to damage your bores, are out to lunch, again in my opinion. This, however, is not Fauci science. This is real science that's untainted by the kinds of people who would argue that, 2 plus 2 can equal 5, or that humans, at least those of us who aren't politicians, only use 10% of their brains. It is simply impossible, if you put any credence in the Brunel hardness, that brass, a far softer metal, can damage or scratch steel. So that means that arguments 1 and 2, for me at least, are off the table. You can't damage steel with brass over the short and medium terms, and even if brass could somehow erode steel over the long term, I have a feeling that it'll be your grandchildren measuring the bore diameter of your heirloom AR-15 that was passed down to them that'll actually be the ones to find out. But that does leave number 3. And I do find this one to be a bit more compelling of an argument. That grit captured by a brush or a rod could damage a bore. Now, the possible kinds of grit that we would be most commonly encountering inside of a bore are obviously lead, copper, steel fragments, carbon, and gunpowder residue. Now, the thinking on this goes that this grit is captured by the brass bristles or becomes embedded in cleaning rods, and the act of passing that brush or rod through a bore is essentially lapping it with those abrasives. Now, in the case of the rod, what's happening, at least what they say, is that the rod flexes under the strain of pushing it and the brush, or jag through, and the flex point is making contact with the sides of your bore. And if you use a segmented rod, they say, that screws together, that process could be even worse, because that grit is being captured at those points where the rod segments join. I don't have super levels of science behind me on this one, so again, this is all my opinion, but I did do a little bit of research. Copper has a Brinell hardness of 89, while lead, whether the core of a bullet or as a cast bullet, can range anywhere from 5 to 22. As for the steel fragments, well, bullets are generally made of a mild steel, and that comes in at 130. So if you were following along, all of these are a lot less than the 262 that 416 stainless steel comes in at. Now again, that means that none of these are actually capable of marring a bore of a decently made barrel. Now, when it comes to carbon and gunpowder residue, well, obviously these don't have hardness ratings. At least I couldn't find any. Now, I don't believe that either of them can actually damage your bore either. Now, as for cleaning rods, you're either looking at mild steel, 130, or aluminum, which is at most 75. So damage from a metal rod doesn't seem to be worthy of fear either. Numbers aside, though, I honestly don't see any type of firearm-related grit that could damage a bore by way of grinding against it. I mean, a .22 long rifle bullet that travels at 1,116.5 feet per second is going at Mach 1 in your bore. Full power rifle rounds can easily hit Mach 2. And there are mad lads out there that push bullets down a bore at Mach 3. I find it difficult to believe that a bullet, lead or steel, copper clad, whatever, traveling anywhere from 1 to 3,000 feet per second is not destroying your bore instantly due to grinding against it, but you passing a bore brush down there, you're potentially carving out canyons due to that same grit that the bullet and the gases are composed of. I already know that someone's spooling up their hate machine to leave a comment saying, well, actually, Redneck, I don't know if you know this, but people do replace their gun barrels due to wear. Absolutely true. And in my opinion, I think that's mostly related due to throat erosion, the effect that hot, high-pressure gases have on the area directly in front of the bullet as it's fired. That's basically a blowtorch that heats up that area just past the chamber, it's called the lead, and then it has a bullet passing through it. Over time, that'll round out the beginning of the lands, causing the bullet to possibly enter the bore a bit skewed and affect accuracy. The vast majority of people, however, will never have to change out a barrel due to wear in the bore itself. Now, I will grant you that shooting for long periods of time with a really hot barrel can cause bore erosion, but we're talking about tens of thousands of rounds before you'll probably notice an effect on accuracy in a normal barrel, and thousands of rounds in one of them fancy super match grade barrels, which would presumably then signal a damaged bore. The end of the day, though, unless you make a practice out of doing endless mag dumps and keeping that non-chrome lined barrel as hot as you possibly can while doing so, you're probably fine for the long haul. So short answer, no, I don't believe that grit can cause damage in a way that you would appreciate it. And use that brass brush with a peaceful mind. Now, regardless of your position on anything that I just said, there are a few things that I think we can all be in agreement on. Don't pass brushes and jags and the rod through your bore from the muzzle end. You don't want to damage the crown. And use quality cleaning components. I would recommend using a one-piece rod, preferably carbon fiber. I think this is like a tipped-in rod that's wrapped in carbon fiber. People love this. Instead of using like a segmented rod, but I've cleaned plenty of bores with one of those as well, and I'm somehow still breathing. I would also recommend avoiding improvised cleaning agents and cleaning equipment. You don't need to make your own cleaning chemicals, rods, brushes, and jags. At any rate, I hope you found today's video to at least be vaguely entertaining and mildly informative. As always, I hope the firearms in your collection have a long and productive lifespan. Take care, and bye-bye.